Duchess caught her husband whispering to another woman. So she set down everything and walked away. The Duke had spent years certain his marriage was nothing more than a tiresome arrangement. What he didn't know was that letting her go would cost him his name, his fortune, and his pride, and that earning her back would become the only thing that ever mattered to him. The candles at Almack's had guttered low by midnight, and the air in the great ballroom had grown thick enough to taste. Catherine, Duchess of Winterbourne, pressed a gloved hand to the pearls at her throat and slipped between the dancers toward the terrace doors. She wanted one clean breath of night air before the next quadrille claimed her. One quiet moment to be no one at all. She did not find quiet. She found her husband. She heard him before she saw him, his low voice carrying through a gap in the heavy velvet drapery that screened the terrace from the ballroom. Catherine stopped where she stood, half hidden in the folds of the curtain, her pale silk gown whispering against the stone. Rain drummed steadily on the terrace beyond, and the wet glow of a single lantern threw two shapes against the wall. Julian and the Countess Sophia, golden and laughing, her bare arms wound about his neck as though she had every right to them. "You worry over nothing," Julian was saying, his mouth close to Sophia's ear. "Catherine is no trouble to me. The marriage was always a tedious, frozen arrangement. My father's politics and her father's money, signed and sealed before either of us could object." Catherine's heart did a strange thing. It did not break all at once the way the poets promised. It simply went very still, like a clock whose pendulum someone had reached out and stopped with one finger. 3 years. 3 years she had managed his estate, soothed his temper, sat up by his bed when the fever took him last winter, and never once told a soul how frightened she had been. Frozen. Tedious. She had given him every warm thing she possessed, and he had filed it away as an inconvenience. Then came the part she would turn over in her mind for many nights after. Sophia's eyes drifted, lazy and satisfied, toward the curtain. They found Catherine in the gloom, and the Countess, knowing perfectly well who watched, did not gasp or pull away or warn Julian with a touch to his sleeve. She smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, the smile of a woman who had arranged exactly this and found it agreeable. Then she turned Julian's chin gently back toward her own face, as if Catherine were a tiresome servant who might be ignored until she withdrew. That smile told Catherine everything. This had not been carelessness. She had been meant to see. Catherine did not weep. She had been raised the daughter of the Earl of Radnor, and a Radnor did not weep where the tongue might hear. She loosened her fingers, and her silk reticule slid from her wrist and fell soundlessly to the floor. She left it where it lay. Then she turned on her heel and walked back through the ballroom with her chin level and her spine straight, past the dowagers and the card tables, and the orchestra sawing out a country dance, and not one soul who bowed to her guessed that the Duchess of Winterbourne had just been buried alive in pearls. The footman at the door fetched her wrap. She stepped out under the dripping portico, and her own town coach rolled forward through the wet, lamps swimming gold in the rain. "Home, Your Grace?" asked her coachman, Pruett, an old and faithful man. "Drive," she said. "Anywhere. Only drive." Behind her, a door banged. Julian had felt it the moment she vanished, the way a man feels a draft when a window is broken somewhere in the house. He pushed Sophia aside, tore back the curtain, and saw the small silk reticule lying on the terrace stones like a dropped glove. He knew it at once. He had paid for the silk himself. Catherine, her name, came out of him strangled. He ran. He shoved through the dancers, knocking a glass of ratafia from a startled gentleman's hand, ignoring the scandalized murmur that rose in his wake. He burst out into the rain, bareheaded, his bespoke evening coat soaking black across the shoulders within seconds. The fine wool that had cost more than a laborer earned in a year ruined utterly and gone unnoticed. The coach was already moving. wheels hissing through the muck of the London street. "Stop!" Julian splashed after it, boots filling with cold water, mud spattering up his white breeches. "Catherine, stop the carriage. I beg you, stop." He caught the trailing rein of the near horse and hauled, half running, half dragged through the mire, the rain blinding him, his careful arrangement of a life coming apart in his fists. "Step down," he gasped up at the dark window. "Only step down and let me speak, please. One word, Catherine, give me one word." The window stayed black and shut. From within, calm and clear and colder than the rain, came her voice. "Drive on, Pruitt." The coachman cracked his whip, the horse lurched, the rain burned through Julian's fingers, and he went down hard into the running gutter, on his hands and knees in the filth of the street. He knelt there in the middle of the road, a duke in the dirt, and watched the two red lamps of his wife's carriage shrink and turn the corner and disappear. He had thought himself the one holding all the cards. He had not once considered that she might simply leave the table. For a long while he did not move at all, while the rain came down and washed the mud in pale rivers around his ruined hands. For 2 days, Julian hunted his own wife across London, like a man searching for a dropped sovereign in a flooded field. He went first to Radnor House, where the Earl's butler informed him with insolent civility that her ladyship was not receiving, and would not receive his grace, at any hour he cared to call. He tried the houses of her acquaintance, the modistes on Bond Street, even the little chapel off Hanover Square where she liked to sit of a morning. Each door closed as politely as the last. London had swallowed her whole. He came home near midnight on the second night, unshaven and hollow-eyed, and found his own grand foyer ablaze with candlelight and turned upside down. Footmen moved up and down the sweeping staircase like ants stripping a carcass. Heavy traveling trunks stood open across the marble, half filled with linen and plate. He saw the family silver going into straw. He saw a strong box he recognized, the one that held her marriage portion papers, the deeds and settlements her father's lawyers had drawn up before the wedding. And directing the whole grim business, sleeves pushed back and lips pressed thin, stood Agnes, Catherine's lady's maid, a small Yorkshire woman who had served the Duchess since girlhood and plainly despised him. "What in God's name is this?" Julian demanded. Agnes did not curtsy. "Her Grace's belongings, sir. What's hers and only what's hers. You may count the spoons after, if it eases your mind. Stop this at once. Every man here answers to me. I am the Duke of Winterbourne, and I forbid. Forbid away, sir." She turned her back on him to fold a shawl. "There's papers say otherwise." The footmen did not so much as pause. They knew, the way servants always know, that the master's word had lost its weight in this house. Julian seized a young footman by the arm. "Set that down." The lad looked frightened, but he looked past Julian, up the stairs, and his eyes went steady. Julian followed the look. Catherine stood at the top of the staircase. She wore a deep plum velvet, traveling pelisse buttoned to the throat, a bonnet already tied, gloves already on. She had dressed not for a quarrel, but for a journey, and the sight of it emptied the breath out of him. She came down slowly, one gloved hand sliding along the banister, and the whole hall seemed to fall quiet around her. "Catherine." He came toward her with his hands open. "Thank God. I have been half mad. Let me explain what you saw. It was nothing. It was wine and foolishness and Sophia's vanity. I swear before heaven." "Don't." She stopped 3 stairs above him so that for once she looked down on him. "Don't swear before heaven, Julian. You have never cared what heaven thought of you." She drew a folded document from inside her pelisse and held it out. He did not take it, so she let it drop. It struck his chest and fell to the floor between them, and he stooped after it before he could stop himself. Kneeling at her feet a second time in 3 days, it was a deed of separation, drawn and witnessed by her father's barristers, every clause set out in a clerk's neat hand. Her portion reclaimed, her residence to be her own. His allowance to her, refused in advance, struck through with a single black line. The cold of it ran through him. He had imagined tears and accusations, a storm he might weather, and, in weathering, win back. He had not imagined paper. Paper could not be charmed or shouted down or carried up to bed and reasoned with by morning. Paper was the end of a thing. "You cannot mean to do this," he said, and hated how small his voice had become. "We are husband and wife before the law and the church. You cannot simply walk out of a marriage." "No," Catherine agreed. "I cannot. The law will keep me your wife in name, since the law was written by men like you, for men like you. But it cannot make me share your house, or your table, or your name spoken kindly. That much is mine to give or keep." She drew her gloves tighter. "And I am keeping it." She stepped past him. Her skirts brushed his sleeve and were gone. At the open door waited a hired post-chaise, the postilion mounted and damp, the horses stamping in the dark. Agnes followed her out with a bandbox. The footman carried down the last of the trunks. Julian rose and went after her into the doorway. "Where are you going?" She paused with one foot on the step. For a moment he thought she might soften, might give him at least the comfort of knowing where in the world she had gone. She looked back at him, and there was no anger left in her face, which was somehow far worse than anger. "Somewhere you are not," she said. The door of the chaise shut. The postilion's whip cracked. The wheels turned over the wet cobbles of Mayfair and bore her away into the night. Julian stood alone in the doorway of his own great house. Behind him the candles burned in an echoing hall, stripped of half its furnishings, and the silence that came down over it was the loudest thing he had ever heard. By the fifth day the whole of fashionable London had the story, and London told it with relish. The tale had grown in the telling, as such tales do, and Julian heard 3 different versions of his own disgrace before noon. In one he had struck the Duchess. In another she had fled to a convent. In every version, however, one detail held firm and true, and it was the one that damned him. The Duke of Winterbourne had kept the Countess Sophia as his mistress, whilst his devoted wife managed his estate and his fever and his good name. The tongue might forgive a man a great deal. It would not forgive him for being found out so clumsily as to lose a Radnor. He went to the Regent's breakfast at Carlton House, because to stay away would have looked like guilt, and arrived to find that attendance was its own punishment. The great rooms blazed with gilt and mirror and hothouse flowers, and through them moved every face that mattered in England. Julian bowed to Lady Sefton, who turned to admire a painting. He greeted old Alvanley, who developed a sudden deafness. A pair of young bucks he had dined with 100 times looked straight through him, as though the air where he stood had merely grown a little cloudy. The cut direct delivered not once, but by a whole drawing-room in turn, until he might have been a ghost wandering his own funeral. He understood then how thoroughly the doors had closed. A man could survive being hated. Being unseen was another matter entirely. He retreated to the smoking room, where the older gentlemen had gathered over their snuff and their port, and there the worst of the morning found him. The Earl of Radnor stood by the cold hearth, and the room emptied around him without a word needing to be spoken. Catherine's father was a broad, iron-gray man with his daughter's steady eyes, and none of her mercy. He did not raise his voice. He never had needed to. Winterbourne. The Earl turned a small glass of port in his fingers. "I gave you my girl. I gave you my name to stand beside yours in the Lords. I gave you the votes that will carry your canal bill through committee come the spring, the bill that is the only thing standing between your estate and the moneylenders. You know this. My lord, I have not finished." The quiet of it was worse than shouting. "You took all I gave, and you set my daughter behind a curtain to watch you fawn over a kept woman. So understand me plainly, my backing is withdrawn. Every vote, every guinea, every door. Your bill will die in the house before Easter, and your debts will fall due, and there will not be a banker in the city who will look at you once. Radnor has turned his back. You have until then to learn what it is to drown." He set down the glass untouched and walked out. No man in the room met Julian's eye. Ruin, then. Not the sting of gossip that fades by August, but the slow, certain dismantling of everything his father had built. He stood alone among the abandoned chairs and felt the floor tilt beneath him. He needed comfort. He needed, God help him, someone who would tell him it could be mended. So he went to Sophia. She received him in her morning room, amid her French furniture and her hothouse. Roses, and she did not rise. "You look dreadful," she said. "Sophia." He came toward her. "It is finished, all of it. Radnor means to ruin me. The bill is dead. I have nothing left but me?" Her brows rose, and the warmth he had imagined there was simply not present, and he saw now, never had been. "My dear Julian, do you know what your little scandal has done to my standing? I am laughed at in every box at the opera. The wronged Duchess is the toast of the season, weeping martyr that she is, and I am cast as the harlot who broke her. I cannot afford you, not poor, and not disgraced. It was you who put the story about. The truth arrived all at once, cold and complete. You let her see us on the terrace. You smiled at her, and then you fed the tale to every gossip in town." Sophia examined her rings. "I thought it would free you," she said lightly. "I thought, once the thing was broken past mending, you would have nowhere left to go but to me. I did rather miscalculate the cost. Come back when you have your fortune in hand, Julian. Until then, I think you had better not be seen on my step." She rang the little bell for her footman. He was shown out like a tradesman with an unpaid account. On the pavement, the cold cleared his head as the rain had not. He thought of Catherine sitting up through his fever with her own hands, asking nothing. He thought of how she had managed his tenants and his temper, and never once made him feel the weight of it. He had held a thing of pure gold and spent his days reaching past it for painted glass. For the first time, Julian understood exactly what he had thrown away, and the knowing of it bent him almost double in the empty street. The cottage stood high on the white cliffs above Dover, small and weathered, with the channel laid out gray and endless beyond its windows. It had been her mother's once, a dower house tucked away from the world, and Catherine had come to it because there was nowhere else in England where the name Winterbourne meant nothing at all. She put off her silks and her pearls and wore plain muslin, the sort a parson's daughter might wear, and she walked. Every morning she went out along the cliff path, with the wind tearing at her bonnet, and the gulls wheeling and screaming below her, and she tried to let the great cold breath of the sea scour the memory of that terrace out of her. She tried to find in the emptiness some kind of peace. It would not come. By the 8th day she had grown thin and pale, and Agnes fretted over her untouched supper trays and the dark hollows beneath her eyes. Catherine could not sleep. She lay each night listening to the waves drag the shingle out and back, and her mind would not stop turning over the same worn coin. She had given him everything, and he had called it tedious. On the morning of the 8th day, the Royal Mail coach labored up the chalk road from the town, and the boy who rode it brought a single letter to the cottage door. Agnes carried it in on a tray as though it might bite. "From London. My lady, it is his hand. I'd know it anywhere." Her mouth was a tight line. "Shall I put it on the fire and save you the trouble?" "No. Catherine took it. Leave me." She broke the seal, expecting threats. A husband stripped of his wife's fortune and his father-in-law's favor would surely come demanding his rights, summoning her back to do her duty, reminding her that the law made her his, that she could have answered. Anger she had in great store. The letter held no anger. He wrote of small things. He wrote that he had gone down to the breakfast room at the townhouse on his first morning alone, and found the silver coffee pot cold, because there had been no one to send word to the kitchen that he was awake, and he had sat at the long empty table. and realized he did not know how the house had ever run warm, only that she had run it. He wrote that he missed her laughter at the breakfast table, the quiet sound she made over the morning chocolate, when something in the paper amused her, a sound he had heard 10,000 times and never once thought to treasure. He wrote that the tenants at Winterbourne had sent word asking after her, the old widow and the Carter children she had nursed through the measles, and that he had not known what to tell them. He wrote that the house was not empty of furniture, for he had replaced what she took, but that it was empty of something he had no word for, and that he understood at last he had spent 3 years starving at a full table. There was no plea at the end. He did not ask her to come back. He only signed it, your husband, who learned your worth too late, J. Catherine sat very still for a long time with the pages in her lap, and a treacherous warmth rose in her chest, and she crushed it down. Words. He had always been clever with words. She rose and crossed to the hearth and fed the letter to the flames, page by page, and watched his careful hand curl and blacken, and told herself she was glad. It was then that Agnes returned, twisting her apron. "My lady, forgive me. There is something I ought to tell you, for you'll hear it from the town soon enough." The maid hesitated. Pruitt had it from a Radnor groom on the road. Your father offered his grace a way out, quiet-like. Said if the Duke would let it be put about that you'd gone strange in your wits, that the fault lay with you and not him. Why? The doors would open again, and the bill would live, and the money would come good. Society would have swallowed it whole. Men do it to wives every day. Catherine's hands went cold, and he refused it, my lady. Flat. Said he'd see his name in the gutter before he'd buy back his comfort with a single word against you. Agnes looked at the fire, at the last of the letter falling to ash. He's ruined now for certain. Chose it, by all accounts. Catherine said nothing. She turned back to the hearth and watched the embers, and the wind howled along the cliff, and the warmth she had crushed down rose again, more stubborn this time, and would not be put out. She had burned his pretty words easily enough, but a man's words cost nothing. She did not know yet what to do with the knowledge that he had thrown his whole world on the fire, and asked her for nothing in return. For the first time since the terrace, the wall around her heart had a crack in it, and she lay awake that night for an entirely different reason. On the 12th day, Julian did the first wholly clean thing he had done in years. He went to Sophia's house in Mount Street, the elegant leased mansion, whose every quarter's rent had come quietly out of his own pocket, and he did not go as a suppliant come crawling for comfort. He went with his man of business at his side, and a sheaf of papers under his arm, and he had the footman announce him loudly in the hall where the whole staff might hear. Sophia received him in her drawing-room with a slow, knowing smile, certain she had read the situation. "I knew you would come to your senses," she said, rising at last to greet him. "A man wants a woman who understands him, not some pale martyr weeping into the sea. Now, tell me how we are to mend your fortunes, and we shall." "I have come to settle our accounts," Julian said. He laid the papers on her little inlaid table. The first ended her lease, signed and witnessed, the house to be given up by quarter day. The second was a plain legal notice forbidding her to set foot on any acre of Winterbourne land in town or country for the remainder of her life. And from his coat he drew a packet tied in ribbon, her own letters to him, the French phrases and the perfumed pages, and set them down beside the rest. "These are yours," he said. "I want nothing of yours in my keeping, and nothing of mine in yours." The smile did not fall so much as harden into something else. Her footman and her maid stood frozen at the edges of the room, and she knew they heard every word, and that by nightfall all Mayfair would know she had been turned off like a tradesman. "You are throwing me into the street," she said. "You have a husband somewhere in Italy who is welcome to house you, or another protector. You will not want for one long." He turned to go. "Stop." Her voice cracked across the room. You forget yourself, your grace. I have kept every foolish note you ever sent me. Do you remember what you wrote? I have it still. One word to the news sheets and you are finished for good and all. A laughingstock in every coffee house in England. Julian almost laughed himself. Sophia, I am already finished. Radnor has seen to that. Print whatever you like. A drowning man does not fear the rain. He had thought that the end of it. He had not reckoned how quickly a clever woman finds the one threat that still has teeth. She crossed to her writing desk, unlocked a small drawer, and held up a single folded sheet, yellowed at the edges. Then perhaps the papers do not interest me after all, she said softly. Perhaps I shall not write to the editors at all. Perhaps I shall write instead to a certain cottage above Dover. This is in your hand, Julian. From the first year of your marriage, do you recall it? You called your wife a dull, frozen creature your father had chained you to. You wrote that you envied any man who got to spend his evenings somewhere warm. You laughed at her in ink to me. Shall I send it to her, this little keepsake? Shall I let your weeping saint read exactly what her husband thought of her, whilst she sat up nursing his fevers? The room went very quiet. Julian felt the old words land like stones. They were his. He could not pretend otherwise, could not deny the hand, or the cruelty, or the careless, comfortable contempt of the man who had written them. That man had existed. He had been that man. For a moment, Sophia watched his face with the satisfaction of a cat that has cornered something small. Send it, Julian said. She blinked. You cannot mean that. Send it by tonight's coach if you wish, but it will arrive too late to do its work, because I am riding to Dover myself, and I will put every word of that letter into Catherine's hands before your messenger is past Rochester. She will hear what I was from my own mouth, the whole black truth of it, with nothing softened and no excuse made. I would sooner she despise me for the man I was than have you teach her to. You have nothing left to threaten me with, Sophia. You taught me my own worth was nothing. I find I believe you, and a man who owns nothing cannot be robbed. He picked up his hat. I cannot mend what I did to her, he said from the doorway. I may never. But I can stand before God knowing I have swept every last grain of you out of my life, and that much at least I will do clean. He left her standing among her cancelled leases and returned love letters, the yellowed sheet still useless in her hand, and walked out into the grey London noon a poorer, freer man than he had entered. Within the hour he had ordered his stallion saddled and his bag packed, deaf to his groom's warnings of the weather, turning foul along the coast road. He would reach Dover or break himself trying. The storm caught him in Kent and would not let him go. He had set out from London 2 days before in nothing worse than a steady drizzle, but by the time he crossed into Kent, the sky had turned the color of a bruise, and the wind came off the channel in great shoving gusts that staggered his horse and flattened the hedgerows. The turnpike road dissolved into a river of brown mud. Twice his stallion went in past the fetlock and had to be coaxed and cursed free. By the second evening, even Julian's iron will had to bow to the dark, and he put up at a coaching inn outside Canterbury, soaked through, his head bent over a tankard he did not drink. It was there, in the low smoky taproom, that the ostler mentioned it. Wild night for the Dover mail to chance it, sir. But chance it they did, not an hour gone. Carrying private letters down to the port, the postboy said, and a fat purse to see them there quick. The man shook his head. Roads past here are washing clean away. They'll be lucky to keep the wheels under them. Julian set down his tankard, an hour gone. Sophia had been as good as her word then. Somewhere ahead of him on that black flooded road rode a boy carrying the cruelest thing he had ever written, the proof of the man he had been. Bound for the one pair of eyes in the world, he could not bear to have read it before he had spoken first. If that letter reached Dover before he did, every honest word he meant to say would arrive as a beggar after a thief. He pushed back his chair. "You'll not ride in this, sir," the innkeeper protested. There's trees down on the Dover Road. You'll break your neck for certain. Then I break it on the way to where I am going, Julian said, and called for his horse. His groom, who had ridden down with him from town, planted himself in the stable doorway with the lantern shaking in his fist. "Your Grace, I beg you. The mare that came in afore you, her rider says the bridge below the hills near under. The beast can't see its own feet in this. Wait for first light, and we'll make Dover by noon. By noon, it may be too late." Julian swung up into the saddle, water already streaming from his greatcoat. "Stand aside, Tom. I'll not ask you to come." He rode out into the teeth of it alone. There are nights that seem to have a grudge against a man, and this was such a night. The rain did not fall so much as fly sideways, stinging his face, blinding him, finding every gap in his coat. The wind screamed in the bare trees overhead and once sent a branch crashing across the road behind him with a sound like a cannon. His stallion, brave beast, laid back its ears and pushed on, but he could feel the fear shuddering through it, feel it slipping and recovering on ground that had turned to soup. 3 miles on, where the road bent sharp around a shoulder of chalk above a dark drop, the horse's hind legs went out from under it. It happened too fast to fight. The world tilted, the lantern-dark sky and the black road changing places, and Julian was flung clear of the saddle into a rocky ditch at the road's edge. He struck his head against stone. White light burst behind his eyes, and then a wet, ringing dark. When it cleared, he was on his back in running water with the rain hammering his upturned face, and the drumming of his stallion's hooves was already fading away up the road into the storm. The beast was gone, bolted for home, and had taken the warmth and the speed and the last of his luck with it. He got up. He did not decide to, exactly. He simply found that lying in the freezing water waiting to die was not a thing his body would consent to do, not yet, not with Dover still ahead of him. He put a hand to his temple and it came away black with blood in the dimness. His head swam. His coat hung on him heavy as lead. He began to walk. 3 miles, the innkeeper had said, to the next change of horses, and Dover beyond that. 3 miles through a tempest, on foot, bleeding, with the cold reaching into his bones and the wind trying to throw him down at every step. He lost his hat. He lost feeling in his hands. Twice he went to his knees in the mud, and twice he hauled himself upright by a fence rail or a milestone, breathing in great ragged sobs that the wind tore away. What drove him was not pride. Pride had died on a London terrace and been buried in a Mayfair drawing room. What drove him now was a single terror, sharper than the cold, that he might die here in a Kentish ditch with his letter unread and his confession unspoken, and that Catherine would live out her whole life, believing the last true thing she had learned of him was that he thought her dull and frozen, that she would never know he had finally seen her for the crown of his life. He could not let that be the end of the story. So he walked and would not stop. The letter reached Dover before Julian did, after all. It came up the chalk road on the battered morning mail, the postboy half drowned, and the coach mud to its axles, and Hollis the butler carried it in to Catherine, where she sat by the parlor fire over a breakfast she had no heart to eat. She knew the hand at once, not Julian's, a lady's hand, looped and elegant and false, Sophia's. She read it through once, standing by the window with the gray sea heaving beyond the glass. It was every cruel thing the Countess had promised. A copy of an old letter set down in Julian's own writing from the first year of their marriage, calling her dull and frozen, a creature chained to him by his father's will, a wife he endured rather than loved. Sophia had added a few honeyed lines of her own, hoping dear Catherine would find the truth instructive. The crack that had opened in Catherine's heart at Dover sealed itself over again, hard as the cliffs, so the contrite letter she had burned, the noble refusal her father had reported, all of it set against this. He had called her frozen in ink and meant it. Whatever soft thing had begun to stir in her these past days, she crushed it now without mercy, and was glad of the cold. She was still standing there, the page shaking very slightly in her hand, when Hollis flung the door wide without so much as a knock, his face white as chalk. "My lady, come quick. There's a man at the gate, half dead, fallen in the lane. He's asking for you, my lady, it's—" Julian came through the door behind him on his own 2 feet, and got 3 steps into the parlor, and fell. He went down across the hearthrug like a felled tree. He was soaked to the marrow, his greatcoat black and heavy with rain and mud, one side of his face caked dark with dried blood from a wound at his temple. His lips had gone blue. He was shaking so violently that his teeth knocked together, and each breath came as a wet, tearing rattle deep in his chest. The proud Duke of Winterbourne, who had once chased her carriage through the London mud, lay shivering and broken on her mother's parlor floor with the sea wind howling at the windows. Catherine's anger had nowhere to stand against such a sight. The letter dropped forgotten from her fingers. Whatever he had written, whatever he had been, no living soul could look on a man dying of cold and fever and feel anything but the plain human need to keep him from death. "Agnes," she called, already on her knees beside him. "Blankets, every wool blanket in the house. Hollis, build the fire high and send the boy for the surgeon in the town. Quickly, both of you." They peeled the sodden coat from him and wrapped him in heavy blankets warmed at the hearth. Catherine cleaned the gash at his temple with her own hands, her fingers steady, though her heart was anything but. His skin burned beneath her touch even as he shook with cold, the lung fever already deep in him. The surgeon, when he came, bled him and shook his head and said the next 2 days would decide it, that the man had no business being alive after such a night, and that whatever had carried him through it had not been good sense. Through it all, Julian drifted in and out of his senses, and in the depths of the fever he began to speak. "Catherine," he murmured, his eyes glittering and unseeing, "I wrote it, the letter. I did write those words. Don't believe I didn't. I was a fool, a blind, comfortable fool, and I thought your warmth was nothing, because I had never gone cold." His hand found hers and gripped it with surprising strength. "Forgive me. Not for the title, not for the money. Hang the title and the money. Forgive me for not seeing you. You were the crown of my whole life, and I wore you carelessly, like a hat." "Hush," she said. "Be still." "Take it," he begged, tears running freely down into the blood and grime on his face. "Take my life if it eases yours. I'll sign it over gladly. Only don't." His grip tightened. "Only don't look at me the way you did from the coach, with nothing in your eyes. Hate me, Catherine. I can bear hating. I cannot bear to be nothing to you." Then he sank back into the fever spent. Catherine knelt very still, his burning hand in both of hers. And across the room, the cruel letter lay face up on the floorboards where she had dropped it. She looked from the cold, elegant words to the broken man who had ridden through a tempest to say worse of himself than Sophia ever could, and to beg her not to be indifferent. The icy wall she had built so carefully did not so much fall as quietly come apart. She did not yet know if she could forgive him, but she knew, sitting there with his fever-hot hand in hers, and the storm fading at last beyond the glass, that she was no longer cold. A month to the day after the terrace at Almack's, they met again in Bath. It was Catherine who had named the place. Bath was neutral ground, a watering town, where half of fashionable England came to take the waters, and the other half came to watch them do it. And she had chosen the upper assembly rooms for the cold formality of the thing. They were to meet there one last time, in the full glare of society, to settle their separate futures. She would sign what wanted signing, and they would each walk out a free creature, and the world would have its final scene to gossip over. That was the bargain. Julian had recovered, though he was thinner than before, and a pale scar still marked his temple where the chalk had opened it. He came to Bath knowing his fortune was gone past saving and caring not at all. The great ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, the air heavy with scent and music, and the low hum of 100 conversations that all this evening were really about one thing. When the Duchess of Winterbourne entered on her father's arm, lovely and composed in silver-gray silk, the whole room turned to drink in the sight. And when the disgraced Duke arrived alone a little after, the temperature of the place seemed to drop. The Earl of Radnor watched him with the flat patience of a man waiting to see a debt foreclosed. Sophia was there too. Catherine saw her across the room, golden and brilliant in crimson, and saw the small reticule clutched too tightly in her gloved hand. She knew without being told what it held. Copies of the letter. Sophia had come to Bath to finish what gossip had begun, to stand up before the cream of society, and read out Julian's old cruelties in his own words, and so chain the scandal to the Winterbourne name forever. The Countess was only waiting for the room to fill, for the audience to be perfect. She never got her moment. Before the dancing could begin, before Sophia could draw her breath, Julian walked out into the very center of the floor. It was a thing simply not done. A gentleman did not stand alone in the middle of an assembly and command the room like a player on a stage. The musicians faltered. The master of ceremonies started forward and then stopped, uncertain. A startled hush spread outward in rings, and into that hush Julian began to speak, his voice carrying clear to every corner. "I will save the Countess Sophia the trouble," he said, "and tell you all myself." A gasp went round. Sophia froze with her hand half into her reticule. "You have been whispering about my marriage for a month." Julian went on, turning slowly so that he met as many eyes as he could. "Whisper no more. Hear it plainly from the only man who knows the whole of it. I kept the Countess as my mistress. I did it whilst my wife ran my house, soothed my tenants, and sat up 3 nights together at my sickbed without a word of complaint. I called her cold. I wrote it down, in this very lady's keeping, and I have no doubt she came tonight to read it to you. I will spare her. The words were mine and they were vile, and the only thing frozen in my marriage was the fool who could not see what he had been given." He looked then at Catherine, who stood very still beside her father, her face white. "Every shameful thing said of this past month belongs to me and to me alone. My wife is without stain. She left me because I gave her cause that no woman of honor could forgive. If there is a name to be dragged through the gutter, let it be Winterbourne, and let hers go free of it entirely. I accept whatever banishment you care to pass on me. Cut me in the street, close your doors, strike me from your books. I have earned all of it. I ask only that you remember when you do, that the lady did nothing but love a man who did not deserve her." He bowed, low and final, to the whole astonished assembly, and the room stayed silent as a church. The thing he had not foreseen, perhaps, was where that silence would turn. For a confession robs a scandal of its sport. There was no secret left to relish, no wronged party to pity but the one the Duke had just placed beyond reproach. And so the cold eyes of the ton, hunting as they always did for someone to despise, swung slowly away from Julian and came to rest on the woman in crimson with the letter still clutched in her hand. Sophia felt it land on her, the contempt she had spent a month aiming at Catherine, and went the color of her own gown. And then, quite suddenly, was not there at all, slipping out a side door before a single soul thought her worth the trouble of a goodbye. The Earl of Radnor said nothing, but he looked at his son-in-law for a long moment, with something that was not quite forgiveness and was no longer hatred, and that was more than Julian had hoped for. Catherine looked at her husband standing alone and unmade in the middle of the floor, and found she could not speak at all. He came to Dover a week later with no carriage, no crest upon the door, no liveried servants to announce him. He came up the chalk road on a hired hack and left it at the inn in the town, and walked the last mile to the cliffs on foot, in a plain dark coat that had seen better days, a man no passing stranger would have taken for a duke at all. which was just as well, for there was not a great deal of Duke left. The canal bill had died in the Lords as the Earl had promised. The bankers had called in their notes. Winterbourne House in town would go to a new tenant by Michaelmas, and the great estate in the country was so deep in mortgage that what came of it each year went straight to the men who had lent against it. Julian owned the clothes on his back, a horse he had hired, and one thing more, which he carried in his breast pocket, and touched now and then like a man making sure of his heart. Catherine was on the cliff path when she saw him coming, her muslin skirts and shawl snapping in the wind off the channel, the gulls crying below. She did not run to him. She stood and waited, her hair coming loose from its pins, and watched him climb the last of the slope toward her. He stopped a few paces off and took off his hat, and the wind did as it liked with his hair. "I had a fine speech ready," he said. "I have forgotten every word of it." "Then you had better speak plainly," said Catherine. "You were always better at plain than fine in the end." He went down on one knee on the wet grass, there on the open cliff with the whole gray sea spread out beyond them, and drew from his pocket the one thing he had kept, the Winterbourne signet ring, heavy old gold, worn smooth by generations of his blood, the ring his father had worn, and his father's father, the ring that had sealed the marriage settlement that bound the two of them together 3 years ago against both their wishes. "This is all I have left of the great Duke of Winterbourne," he said. "The houses are gone, the money is gone. The name is mud from here to London, and I find I do not grieve a moment of it. I came to ask you something I never asked you the first time, because the first time our fathers asked it for us." He held the ring up to her in his open palm. "Catherine, let me court you, not as a husband claiming his rights, for I have none. As a poor man who has nothing to offer but a heart that took far too long to wake. Let me earn you slowly, from the beginning, as I should have done at the start. I will wait as long as it takes. I will wait forever, if you will only let me wait near you." The wind tore the words away almost as he spoke them, but she heard everyone. For a long moment Catherine looked down at him, at the proud man, stripped of everything that had once made him proud, kneeling in the mud of a cliff top with his last gold in his hand, and no expectation of anything in return. Then she reached into the pocket of her own gown and drew out a folded paper, worn soft at the creases. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. He shook his head. "The deed of separation, the one I put into your hands in Mayfair. It still holds, Julian. The law cannot make me share your name kindly. You said it yourself, and this paper sets me free of you entirely. I have only to keep it and walk away, and you can never follow." She held it out into the wind, and then with both hands she tore it across, and again, and let the pieces go. The gale took them at once and scattered them out over the edge of the cliff, white scraps whirling away above the sea until they were lost against the foam below. "I was given to you once, like a parcel," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "I will not be given again, but I will choose. That is a different thing entirely, and it is mine to do." She held out her hand to him. "Get up off the ground, you foolish man. You will catch another fever, and I have nursed you through quite enough." Julian rose and slid the old signet ring onto her finger where it hung loose and warm, and she folded her hand to keep it. And at last, after a month of cold and storm and ruin, Catherine smiled. Not the careful, level smile she gave the world, the one that gave nothing away. The other one. The one he had not seen since before the terrace. The one that was only ever for him, that he had been too blind for years to know the worth of. They turned their backs on the road to London, on the carriages and the assembly rooms and the Whispering Tun, and walked down the cliff path toward the little cottage, with its smoke rising into the clean sea air, hand in hand, husband and wife, and for the first time, neither of those things and something far better, two people who had, at terrible cost, simply chosen each other.